What happens when an alien empire underestimates a determined species? The once proud kingdom of Kalios, nestled on the planet of the same name, had been a beacon of resilience. Kalios was a lush green world full of towering forests, vast mountain ranges, and cities built into the cliffs. The people-proud warriors and skilled artisans had never known defeat until now. The invasion had come swiftly with ships from the alien species known as the Zephyr, a race of sleek, silver-skinned beings who stood over 7 feet tall. Their dark eyes were deep pools reflecting the cold intelligence of their species. The Zephyr were advanced beyond measure, their weapons and technology able to disintegrate entire platoons of soldiers with a single shot. They were the epitome of efficiency and perfection, moving with precision, their bodies encased in form-fitting armor that hummed with energy. Kane, the stalwart defender of Kalios, stood at the front lines, her muscles taut beneath the battle-worn armor of her people. At 185 centimeters, she was a towering figure herself with long black hair pulled back into a tight braid. Her dark brown eyes reflected the pain of the ongoing war. Her face was hard-carved by years of battle, and though she had fought valiantly with her mechanical weaponry, she could feel the weight of her growing doubt. The Zephyr had far superior weapons, energy guns, that could cut through metal like paper, and shields that made their troops nearly invincible. As she fired another shot from her trusty rifle, a mechanical weapon handed down through generations, she saw the alien soldiers advance again, their sleek armor flashing under the planet's twin suns. The ground beneath her feet trembled as their massive war machines moved toward her position. "Damn!" Kane muttered under her breath, wiping sweat from her brow. "They're too strong." The battle was already lost. The forces of Kalios had been pushed back into the capital, and the Zephyr's relentless assault showed no signs of slowing. The humans' ancient technology simply couldn't stand up to the might of the invaders. She could hear the screams of her comrades being torn apart by the alien energy blasts, and she knew the end was near. Suddenly, as Kane took a breath to steady herself, a sharp pain struck her shoulder. She collapsed her rifle, slipping from her hands. Looking up, she saw one of the Zephyr soldiers standing over her, their dark eyes emotionless as they pointed their energy weapon at her head. "Obsolete," the alien soldier said in a cold mechanical voice. "You are weak." Before she could protest, a surge of electricity ran through her body, sending her into unconsciousness. When Kane awoke, she was shackled to the cold metal walls of an alien ship. The familiar buzz of the Zephyr ship's energy shield hummed around her, and the oppressive silence of the sterile cell filled her ears. She was a prisoner. Her kingdom was lost, and her people were now enslaved. She could still feel the sting of the shame, the weight of failure pressing down on her chest. "What happened?" Kane whispered to herself, her voice hoarse. From the shadows of the room, she heard a voice she didn't recognize, one filled with a strange sense of urgency. "You're not the only one who's been taken, but if you want to survive, you're going to have to fight harder than ever." It was then that Kane realized something crucial. While the Zephyr had defeated Kalios with their advanced weaponry, they had made a mistake. They had underestimated the one thing they could not calculate: human resolve. And as the ship shook with an unexpected force, Kane's heart pounded. Whoever was attacking the Zephyr might be her only chance to turn the tide. She gritted her teeth, resolve returning to her eyes. This war was far from over. Kane had been locked in a sterile, dimly lit cell aboard the Zephyr warship, her arms shackled to the wall. Her mind still raced with thoughts of the failed defense of Kalios, her homeworld now under the control of the Zephyr. But she wasn't alone. Across the cell, a man sat against the cold metal wall, Kian, a human mercenary, seemingly calm and indifferent to their grim situation. Kane initially dismissed Kian. He was shorter than most, about 175 centimeters, with rugged, unkempt hair and worn clothes. He didn't look like a soldier, more like a wanderer who had ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. To her, he was just another mercenary, someone who relied on coin, not honor or skill. She didn't see him as someone who could help her escape. Kian broke the silence first. "We need to think our way out of here. Fighting our way out will just get us killed." Kane raised an eyebrow. "And you have a plan?" Her tone was skeptical. She wasn't used to relying on others, especially someone like him. Instead of answering, Kian pulled out a small mechanical device from his pocket. With swift, practiced movements, he used it to unlock her shackles. Kane's jaw dropped. "How did you?" Kian simply shrugged, smirking. "Like I said, thinking our way out is the only way." With her restraints removed, Kane was forced to acknowledge the unexpected skills Kian had. As they moved through the alien ship, Kane observed him more closely. Kian was armed with old-fashioned weapons, a rusted hammer, a gun that looked ancient, and a few blades. These weapons were nothing like the Zephar's sleek energy-based tech, but Kian used them with surprising precision. The hammer smashed through a heavily reinforced door, and his well-aimed throw of a blade short-circuited the alien security systems. Kane was stunned. "That shouldn't have worked," she muttered under her breath. "Works better than you think," Kian replied, reloading his weapon with casual confidence. As they continued to move through the ship, Kane began to see the value of Kian's methods. It wasn't about advanced technology, it was about using what was available, adapting quickly, and thinking on your feet. The Zyphar had relied too heavily on their advanced weapons and technology, but Kian was proving that ingenuity and resourcefulness could overcome even the most advanced systems. Kane found herself slowly changing her perspective. The power of humans didn't lie in their tech, it was their ability to adapt and survive under any conditions. She finally understood what Kian had been showing her all along. "We're not so weak after all," Kane said, her tone more respectful now. Kian smiled. "Exactly. Let's keep moving." For the first time since her capture, Kane felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a partner, and together they might just stand a chance. As Kane fought alongside Kian, her perception of humanity began to shift. She had always believed that strength in battle came from advanced technology and powerful weapons. However, after witnessing Kian's unwavering perseverance and adaptability, Kane realized the true strength of humans lay in their ability to endure, to keep fighting against all odds. One evening, as they hid behind cover from the Zyphar forces, Kane found herself reflecting on the battles they had faced so far. The Zephar's advanced weaponry and technology seemed unbeatable at first, but every time they were knocked down, they found a way to rise again. Kian's relentless resolve, his ability to keep moving, even when the situation seemed hopeless, reminded her of something fundamental: the strength of the human spirit was unmatched. "It's not just about fighting," Kane realized watching Kian reload his weapon with calm precision. "It's about not giving up no matter what." Kian's quiet determination sparked something within her. She had always thought of herself as the strongest warrior in Kalios, but now she understood that true strength wasn't only physical, it was mental and emotional. It was about refusing to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Later, as they made their way through the Zephyr warship, Kian shared a part of his past with Kane. "I wasn't always a mercenary," he began, his voice steady. "I used to be in the military, but after my unit was wiped out, I had nothing left. No family, no home, just me." Kane listened, a new respect forming in her mind. Kian's past, marked by loss and survival, had shaped him into the man he was today. "I became a mercenary because I had to survive," he continued. "I fight for the people who can't fight for themselves." Kane understood now. Kian's past, his drive to keep going despite everything, was what made him such a valuable partner. His persistence wasn't just about surviving, it was about making sure the fight meant something. As Kane adapted her approach to the fight, she began to incorporate Kian's methods. Rather than relying on brute force, she used the environment, moved swiftly, and thought strategically. Her newfound unpredictability took the Cypher by surprise. The Cypher had underestimated the human capacity for adaptation, and Kane now understood that the true power of humanity lay not in their weapons, but in their ability to adapt and fight with heart. The Zypher warship had been eerily quiet for hours, the hum of its engines a constant backdrop to Kane and Kian's quiet movements through the dark corridors. But that calm was suddenly shattered. Without warning, alarms blared across the ship, their shrill sound echoing in every corner. The lights flickered, and the ship itself trembled violently as if struck by an unseen force. "What's happening?" Kane muttered, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. The ship's sudden disarray was unsettling. Something was terribly wrong. Before Kian could respond, the metallic wall of their cell was blasted open by an explosive force. Dust and debris flew everywhere. From the smoldering hole emerged a squad of Zyphar elite soldiers, their tall, armored figures silhouetted against the wreckage. Their black and silver suits glimmered with an unsettling cold energy. and their glowing red eyes fixed on Kane and Kian like predators locking onto their prey. Kane's heart pounded. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were the Zyfar's best team of special operatives designed for high-risk, high-reward missions. They moved with precision, their movements sharp and calculated. There was no room for error now. "They're not the regulars," Kian said under his breath, his eyes scanning the soldiers' armor and weapons. "We'll need to think fast." Kane fired a shot from her rifle, but the blast was absorbed by the Zyfar's advanced energy shields. The soldiers barely flinched, their shields glowing bright with each impact. Kian quickly grabbed his makeshift weapon, a heavy hammer, and swung it at the nearest soldier. But the blow was deflected with a swift movement. The Zyfar soldier countered with a series of quick, precise strikes. Kane could tell they were outmatched. "We need a plan." Kane growled, her voice full of frustration. Their weapons and brute force weren't enough. The Zyfar were simply too well trained, their armor too advanced. Kian didn't hesitate. "We need to stop fighting them head on. If we keep doing that, we'll lose." Kane shot him a skeptical glance. "What else do we have? Our weapons are useless against them." Kian's eyes narrowed. "We fight smarter. We use the ship's layout, set traps, use their predictability against them." Kane's brow furrowed in doubt. "You're saying we can outsmart them?" Kian nodded, a quiet confidence in his movements. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Follow my lead." The situation was dire, but Kane knew they had no choice. They had to adapt or die. She and Kian moved quickly, dodging behind corners and using the narrow hallways to their advantage. They lured the Zyfar soldiers into tight spaces where their armor and shields were less effective. Kane was amazed at how Kian seemed to anticipate their every move. He used the environment to his advantage, knocking over crates and debris to slow down the soldiers, creating confusion and disarray. As they managed to outmaneuver the Zyfar soldiers, Kane's skepticism began to fade. Kian's strategy wasn't about brute force, it was about using the environment, exploiting weaknesses, and keeping the enemy off balance. It was a risky tactic, but it was working. When Kane saw an opening, she took it, catching one of the Zyfar soldiers off guard. The soldier was momentarily stunned by a blast from Kian's old rifle, and Kane swiftly disarmed him, taking his weapon. She turned to Kian with a sense of disbelief. "It's working," she said, her voice tinged with awe. Kian gave her a brief smile. "I told you, sometimes the best weapon is the mind." Kane's respect for Kian deepened. She had always believed in the power of physical strength and advanced weaponry, but now she saw the truth. Adaptability, quick thinking, and surprise were the real keys to survival. The Sci-Fi elite soldiers were finally retreating, confused and frustrated by the unexpected turn of events. Kane stood victorious, though her breath came in sharp, heavy gasps. The immediate danger was over, but she knew the war was far from won. The Zyfar had underestimated humanity, just as she had once underestimated Kian. As she looked at her makeshift partner, Kane realized something's strength was not only in the weapons or armor you carried, it was in the ability to think, adapt, and outwit your enemies. The battle had changed, and so had she. The battle between Kane, Kian, and the Zyfar had escalated rapidly. Initially, the Zyfar had seen the humans as weak, relying on superior firepower and technology to crush them. But now, after several encounters, the Zyfar had begun to understand that humans were far more resilient than they had anticipated. The humans' ability to adapt, improvise, and persist was something the Zyfar had not accounted for, and this realization was beginning to unsettle them. Kane watched from behind cover as the Zyfar soldiers advanced with more caution than before. Their precision and coordination, once so flawless, now seemed hesitant, as if they feared what the humans might do next. Kane could see it in their eyes, uncertainty. The Zyfar were beginning to realize that they were no longer in control of the situation. "They're starting to change their approach," Kane whispered to Kian, who was crouched beside her, scanning their surroundings. "They're learning." Kian nodded grimly. "They didn't expect us to fight like this adaptively. They're worried now. And when they're worried, they make mistakes." The Zyfar had deployed new tactics, traps, decoys, and more defensive measures. But their growing fear only made them more predictable. As Kane had expected, their reliance on superior technology was being turned against them. The Zyfar were starting to question whether their advanced weapons could truly secure them. Victory, especially against an enemy that had learned how to use their environment and instincts to counteract their strengths. The environment they fought in only added to the tension. The ship's interiors were treacherous, narrow, winding corridors filled with sharp turns dimly lit by flickering lights. The temperature fluctuated wildly, the air growing thick and stifling in some places, and bitterly cold in others. With each step, the Zifar soldiers seemed to grow more uncomfortable, more hesitant, while Kane and Kian, accustomed to the hardships of war, pressed on with relentless determination. "We can't keep fighting like this, Kane," Kian said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "The ship's layout is working against us. We need to think faster." Kane nodded, her exhaustion becoming palpable. "We've got to adapt to the environment, use it to our advantage." They moved quickly, exploiting the tight spaces to stay one step ahead of the Cipher. With every battle, Kane's confidence in their new tactics grew, but so did the realization that they could never stop evolving. In the heat of the moment, Kian's strategy took a dramatic turn. He quickly devised a plan to create confusion among the Cipher, setting up traps using the ship's machinery and debris. At first, Kane doubted the simplicity of his approach, but when the Cipher fell into the chaos Kian had planned, she was left stunned. The Zifar forces, overwhelmed by the unexpected turns of the battle, began retreating. Their disciplined formation crumbled, and the humans had succeeded in pushing them back. Kian's simple tactics, using the environment, setting traps, and exploiting the Zifar's overconfidence, had proven devastatingly effective. "Unbelievable," Kian said, her voice full of awe. "They actually fell for it." Kian, breathing heavily, but with a triumphant grin, said simply, "They were too focused on their tech to see what was really happening. The Myfar had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price." Kane had always relied on her traditional methods of warfare, brute force strength and mechanical weapons, but after seeing Kian's success with unconventional tactics, she began to adopt his strategies into her own combat style. She had learned that adaptability was key to overcoming the Myfar's superior technology. Instead of charging head-on into battle, Kane started to use the ship's corridors to her advantage, laying traps and using her environment to create confusion among the Zephyr soldiers. She applied Kian's method of misdirection, leading the Zephyr into vulnerable positions and exploiting their over-reliance on their shields and advanced weaponry. She even began using old-fashioned tactics such as stealth and surprise attacks to level the playing field. The changes Kane made in her approach were noticeable. Her soldiers, who had once followed her lead with unquestioning obedience, began to see a new way of fighting. They weren't just fighting with their weapons, they were fighting with their wits. The success of these tactics gave the soldiers of Kalios renewed hope, showing them that victory could still be within reach despite the overwhelming odds. It also inspired Kane's troops to fight with a new sense of purpose, one that extended beyond physical strength to mental resilience. These victories were significant not just because of the battles won, but because they symbolized hope. For the first time since the invasion began, Kane felt the weight of Kalios' future shifting in their favor. Her people were no longer resigned to defeat, they were fighting back with intelligence, with cunning, and with a renewed sense of strength. Kian continued to mentor Kian, teaching her the importance of mental strength and perseverance. He often spoke about the power of human will, the refusal to give up, even in the face of defeat. "It's not just about the weapons you carry," he told her one evening as they sat in the quiet of the ship's hull. "It's about the strength you carry within." Kane began to understand what Kian meant. She had always been focused on physical strength and tactics, but Kian was teaching her that mental resilience, the ability to push through, adapt, and outlast, was just as important. The battle for Kalios was not just about fighting harder, it was about fighting smarter and holding on to hope when it seemed like all was lost. Kian's lessons gave her a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a warrior. But even as Kane grew more confident in her new approach, she wondered if she could truly lead her people with the same level of tenacity and mental resilience that Kian showed. She knew the journey was far from over, but with Kian's guidance, she felt more prepared to face the challenges ahead. The Zifar forces began to notice the change in human tactics. They had been prepared for the usual methods of war, direct confrontations, overwhelming force. But now the humans were fighting smarter, using every trick in the book to outwit their more advanced opponents. The Zyfar's once confident commanders started to feel the pressure. Their soldiers, who had been invincible at the beginning of the war, were now facing something they hadn't anticipated: humans who could adapt and think on their feet. As the Sci-Fi struggled to adjust to these new human tactics, they found themselves caught in traps they couldn't predict. The balance was shifting, and the Zifar were beginning to fear the very enemy they had once underestimated. They knew their superior technology could only take them so far. The humans were showing them that true strength lay in adaptability and resilience, qualities the Zifar hadn't prepared for. Kane and Kian's unorthodox methods had proven effective. The Zifar were now feeling the weight of their overconfidence, and Kane could see the fear in their eyes. The tide of war had shifted, and the humans were now the ones in control. Kane and Kian's most daring mission yet was to infiltrate the Zifar's central command base, located in the deepest sector of their massive warship. The base was housed in a fortified chamber known as the heart of the ship, a labyrinth of metallic corridors and reinforced walls designed to withstand the heaviest of assaults. This command center was where the Zifar's leaders coordinated the entire invasion of Kalios, making it the ultimate target. Its location was carefully protected, surrounded by layers of advanced security energy shields and elite guards. If Kane and Kian succeeded, it would cripple the Zifar's military operations and shift the tide of the war. The entrance to the command center was a massive, imposing door made of indestructible alloy guarded by high-tech defense systems and a battalion of Zifar soldiers. The air was thick with tension as the two humans approached their plan, carefully laid out over weeks of reconnaissance. They had learned the layout of the ship, discovered the weaknesses in the security system, and identified blind spots where they could slip in undetected. Kane and Kian approached the base from an old maintenance hatch located on the side of the ship's hull. Using the narrow, dark corridors of the lower levels, they moved silently, evading patrols and bypassing security checkpoints. Kian, with his experience in stealth and sabotage, used an old EMP device to disable the ship's surveillance cameras, while Kane took the lead, her senses heightened, always alert for any potential threats. The two worked like a well-oiled machine, their movements seamless as they crept closer to their objective. They reached the base's entrance undetected, hidden behind a thick layer of cargo storage. The only obstacle left was a heavily fortified door. Kane, relying on Kian's guidance, used the tools they had brought to hack into the base's power grid, temporarily shutting down the door's security systems. With a soft hiss, the door slid open, revealing the heart of the Zifar's operations, an enormous chamber filled with holographic displays, advanced weaponry, and the commanding officers of the Sci-Fi army. As they stepped inside, Kane's heart raced. The gravity of the situation hit her. This wasn't just an attack, it was a chance to bring an end to the Sci-Fi's reign over Kalios. But before they could make their move, the Sci-Fi initiated a brutal counterattack, their elite soldiers appearing from hidden compartments, sealing off all exits. Kane and Kian had no choice but to fight their way through, relying on the surprise they had gained from infiltrating the base. As Kane and Kian made their way deeper into the heart of the Zifar's command center, their plans seemed to be falling into place. They had breached the outer defenses, taken down multiple squads, and were closing in on the central command. However, just as they reached the main control room, the Zifar executed a move they hadn't anticipated: a deadly ambush. Without warning, a loud thud echoed through the chamber, and the floor beneath them shifted. The entrance they had just used slammed shut, trapping them inside. Kane spun around, eyes wide, as a heavy metallic door descended, sealing off their escape. It was a trap. The Sci-Fi had known they were coming all along and had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. From the shadows, the Sci-Fi elite soldiers, armed with high-tech disruptor rifles, poured in, surrounding them in an instant. These soldiers were the best of the best, faster, stronger, and more skilled than the regular forces Kane and Kian had faced. The air crackled with tension as the Zifar closed in, their glowing red eyes fixed on the two humans, who were now outnumbered and outgunned. Kane's breath quickened as she assessed their options. The Zifar had them cornered, every exit was blocked, and their weapons were useless against the Zifar's energy shields. Kian didn't hesitate. "We need to move," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We're not going to win this by fighting head-on." Kane nodded, trusting Kian's instincts. They had no choice but to find a way out, and fast. Kian quickly scanned the room and pointed to a narrow ventilation shaft high above them. "We climb." With no time to waste, Kane and Kian sprinted toward the shaft, dodging blaster fire as the Sci-Fi soldiers advanced. Kane's heart raced as she reached the wall, grabbing onto a series of metal bars. With Kian's help, they hoisted themselves up narrowly, avoiding the blast that scorched the air around them. As they climbed higher, Kian set a trap. He triggered the base's internal alarm system, sending a wave of chaos through the Cypher's ranks. The soldiers' focus was momentarily diverted just enough for Kane and Kian to reach the ventilation shaft and escape into the dark tunnels beyond. Out of breath, Kane turned to Kian, a mix of relief and disbelief in her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. Kian, still focused, and nodded. "For now. Let's keep moving." Despite the Cypher's technological superiority, their failure to anticipate the humans' quick thinking and determination had turned the tide. For Kane and Kian, it was another victory against all odds, proving that, with the right tactics and unwavering resolve, humans could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. Kane and Kian emerged from the ventilation shaft into the heart of the Zifar command center. The room before them was enormous, a vast high-tech control hub filled with hollow screens, complex machinery, and rows of Zifar officers manning consoles. It was unlike anything Kane had ever seen, a place where every decision made could shape the fate of entire worlds. At the far end of the room, sitting in a grand chair, was the Zyphar general, the mastermind behind the invasion of Kalios. The command center was the Zyphar's nerve center, a place brimming with both cutting-edge technology and dangerous secrets. The walls were lined with screens showing various sectors of the war, and the air felt thick with power. This was the pivotal point, the center where the Zifar had directed their forces, and now Kane and Kian were here to end it all. It was now or never. Kane and Kian had made it this far with stealth and speed, but now the final test awaited them. As they moved deeper into the room, they were met with the Zypher's elite guards. The soldiers were more heavily armed than any Kane had faced before, their weapons glowing with a menacing energy. They had to fight their way to the general, but it wouldn't be easy. The room's layout, with its high ceilings and multiple escape routes, made it a deadly battlefield. The stakes were higher than ever. This fight wasn't just for survival, it was for the fate of Kalios. If they failed here, the Zyphar would have complete control. Kane felt the weight of her responsibility, but her determination pushed her forward. With a quick glance at Kian, she nodded. "Let's end this." The final confrontation came when Kane and Kian faced the Zyphar general. Sitting high on a platform, the general regarded them with cold, calculating eyes. The general had long viewed humanity as weak and outdated species, incapable of facing the might of the Zyphar Empire. To the Zyphar general, humans were a nuisance, no more than an obstacle to be crushed. The general was tall, armored in sleek silver plating that shimmered under the dim lights of the command center. His presence was commanding, and the aura of superiority surrounding him was palpable. Kane could feel her heart pounding, but she stood firm, staring down the being who had underestimated humanity for so long. "You truly think you can win the Zyphar?" General sneered, his voice full of disdain. "You, a species that has never known peace, trying to stand against the might of the Zyphar?" Kane's grip tightened on her rifle. "You made one mistake. You thought we were weak." The battle erupted instantly. The Zyphar general unleashed a torrent of energy blasts from his gauntlet, his soldiers providing cover fire. Kane and Kian dodged and returned fire, but the general's speed and technology made him a formidable opponent. The air was filled with the sharp sounds of energy blasts and the clash of metal as Kane and Kian fought for their lives. Despite the general's superior technology, Kane and Kian used their greatest advantage strategy. They lured the general into a narrow corridor where his weapons were less effective. Kian, relying on his quick thinking, triggered a nearby control panel, causing the ship's lights to flicker and briefly disable the Ziphar's shields. It was a risky move, but it gave Kane the opening she needed. She charged, using her mechanical weapon to disarm the general with one swift strike. As the general stumbled, Kane and Kian pressed their advantage, pushing him into a corner. The Zyphar leader, once so sure of his victory, now realized that the humans were not what he had expected. They were not just fighting with their weapons, they were fighting with everything they had. In the end, Kane and Kian stood victorious. The general, defeated and disarmed, could only watch as they dismantled his operations, bringing the Ziphar's invasion to a halt. The victory was not just a physical one, it was a victory of the human spirit, resilience, adaptability, and the sheer determination to fight for survival. As the command center crumbled around them, Kane turned to Kian. There was no arrogance in her eyes, just quiet, undeniable pride. "We did it," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Kian nodded. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about not giving up. The victory sent a powerful message to the Zephyr and to the galaxy. Humanity had shown that they were not to be underestimated. Their strength didn't lie in their weapons or their technology. It was in their unyielding will to fight to survive and to protect what mattered most. And no alien force could ever take that from them. After the final victory at the Zephyr Command Center, Kane began to fully appreciate the unconventional tactics Kian had taught her. The old methods of war, the ones she had once dismissed as outdated, were now proving to be the key to turning the tide of battle. These tactics, which involved stealth surprise and using the environment to their advantage, were vastly different from the highly advanced technology-driven warfare the Cipher relied on. Kian's old-fashioned tactics using the terrain ambushing enemies, creating diversions and striking when least expected, had given the human forces a surprising advantage. Kane realized that these tactics worked because they exploited the overconfidence and predictability of the Zephyrs' technologically superior approach. The Zephyr soldiers had been trained for direct combat with superior weapons and armor, but the humans used their surroundings to level the playing field. Kane applied these tactics to her own forces, incorporating them into their battle strategies. They began to fight smarter, not harder. Initially, Kane had her doubts. Could these primitive methods really work against an enemy as advanced as the Zephyr? But as her troops began to execute these strategies, the results were undeniable. The Zephyr were caught off guard, and for the first time the humans had the upper hand. Kane's confidence grew with every victory, and the soldiers of Kalios followed her lead. The kingdom of Kalios had shifted from a state of survival to one of triumph, no longer relying solely on high-tech weapons, but on the adaptability, intelligence, and tenacity of its people. Kane's realization went beyond just adapting Kian's tactics. She began to understand that the true strength in battle didn't lie in technology alone. It was in the ability to think on the fly, to be creative, and to adapt to any situation. The Zephyr had always believed that their superior tech would ensure victory, but they had underestimated the human capacity to innovate under pressure. Kane saw that despite their technological advantage, the Zephyr had not evolved the ability to be flexible in their strategies, and that was their downfall. This shift in thinking had a profound impact on Kane's approach to warfare. She no longer saw victory as something that could be won by sheer strength or advanced weapons. It was the creativity, the willingness to adapt, and the unity of purpose that made the difference. These were the qualities that made humans formidable, and Kane now understood that this was where humanity's true power lay. With each victory, the Zephyr forces found themselves pushed back further. They had underestimated the resilience of the human spirit, and now, after countless ambushes, tactical retreats, and well-executed counterattacks, they were forced to retreat. Their technology could not compensate for their failure to anticipate the human ability to adapt and fight intelligently. The Zephyr had once thought their superior technology would make them unstoppable, but Kane and Kian had proven them wrong. When the Zephyr finally withdrew, it was a humbling defeat. Kane and Kian stood together watching as the Zephyr fleet retreated, unable to continue their assault on Kalios. There was a deep sense of accomplishment in the air. Kalios had not only survived, it had prevailed. Kane felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, but most of all, gratitude. The battle had been won not just with weapons, but with determination, creativity, and the strength of the human spirit. Kian, standing beside her, offered a quiet nod. "We did it." Together, Kane responded, her voice full of respect. But even as they celebrated their victory, there was a sense of uncertainty in the air. Would the Zephyr return now more aware of humanity's strength? Kane didn't know. But one thing was clear: they had shown the galaxy that humans would not be so easily defeated. After their hard-fought victory, Kane and Kian stood at the precipice of rebuilding what had been lost. The war had taken everything from Kalios, its cities, its resources, and its people. Yet the most significant part of their victory was not the destruction of the Zephyr invasion, but the strength and resilience they had proven. As the kingdom of Kalios began to rebuild, Kane and Kian made a conscious decision. They would not rely on technology or advanced weaponry. Instead, they would rely on the spirit of their people, the very thing that had brought them through the darkest of times. Kane and Kian sat together in the War Council room, surrounded by the leaders of Kalios. The walls once broken and scarred by battle were now being reinforced. The sound of rebuilding echoed through the halls. Kane looked out the window, her gaze soft but determined. "We could rebuild with the tech the Zyphar left behind," Kane said quietly, her voice thoughtful. "But that's not the path forward. The Zyphar thought they could defeat us because they had the strongest weapons. But we proved that it's not about the weapons, it's about what we fight for." Kian, sitting beside her, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We need to rebuild our kingdom with that in mind. It's not about relying on what's easy, what's advanced. It's about the people, their strength, their will." Kane looked out the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We'll build a society that focuses on resilience, creativity, and unity, not just weapons and technology." In the coming weeks, Kane began to implement a new approach to rebuilding Kalios. Instead of focusing on restoring the technological advances they had before the war, she encouraged the people to focus on strengthening their resolve, their adaptability, and their community spirit. The kingdom began to thrive again, but this time it wasn't through relying on advanced machinery or superior weaponry. It was through hard work, collaboration, and the shared strength of the people. Kane knew that the military needed to change as well. The Zifar had come for Kalios with overwhelming force, relying on their superior technology. But Kane realized that moving forward, the Kalios military needed to focus not just on weapons, but on human resilience and strategy. In a meeting with her generals, Kane addressed the new direction for the army. "We'll focus on what makes us human: strategy, adaptability, and never giving up. We won't rely on just weapons. We'll rely on each other, our ability to think, to fight, and to never surrender." Her generals exchanged glances, but Kane's resolve was undeniable. Over the next few months, she restructured the training programs. Soldiers were taught not just to fight, but to think on their feet, to improvise, and to use their surroundings to their advantage. The new training focused on quick thinking, endurance, and using unconventional tactics, the very tactics that had helped them defeat the Zyphar. "We can't be predictable," Kane told her soldiers during a training exercise. "The Zyphar thought they could defeat us because they thought they knew how we would fight. We proved them wrong, and we will do it again with every battle and every war." The transformation of the Kalios military was remarkable. The soldiers, once rigid and reliant on technology, were now more flexible, creative, and adaptive. They were no longer just soldiers. They were warriors in every sense of the word, capable of adapting to any situation and making the most of what they had. While advanced technology still had its place, Kane understood now that the true strength of humanity didn't lie in machines, it lay in the unyielding spirit of the people. "The Zyphar came for us thinking they were invincible," Kane said to Kian one evening. "But we showed them that the true power isn't in what you can build. It's in what you can endure, how far you can push yourself, and how you fight when everything else fails." Kian looked at her, his face thoughtful. "And that's what makes humans unique. We'll always find a way, no matter how dark it gets." Kane smiled, looking out at the kingdom they had rebuilt. "This is just the beginning. We have a future to build, and it won't be one built on fear or technology. It will be built on the strength of our people." Kane knew that moving forward she would lead Kalios not through military might or technological dominance, but through the strength and resilience of its people. The lessons learned from their victory would shape their future, and the kingdom would rise again stronger than ever, built on the unshakable will of its people. After the war, Kane stood looking out over the rebuilt kingdom of Kalios, a place scarred by conflict, but rising again through the resilience of its people. The battles had been fierce, and the odds had been stacked against them, but in the end, the strength of the human spirit had triumphed. Through this hard-fought victory, Kane had learned a crucial lesson. The true power in war came not from advanced technology, but from the tactics and the indomitable spirit of the people. Kane had always relied on her military training and the advanced technologies available to her. However, through the course of the war, she realized that the Zyphar's superior technology could only get them so far. It was human adaptability, creativity, and relentless determination that had made the difference. The ability to think strategically, to use the environment to one's advantage, and to fight with everything on the line were far more effective than any weapon or machine. Kane's perspective had shifted. She no longer saw power in weapons, but in the will to overcome adversity. This was the true strength of humanity. Kian had been Kane's teacher throughout the war, guiding her in the ways of human tactics. He had taught her to think outside the box, to use everything at her disposal, and to rely on the power of human ingenuity. Kian's lessons were not just about combat, they were about understanding the human spirit, the ability to fight despite overwhelming odds, to keep going when all seems lost. Through him, Kane learned that the strength of a warrior was not measured by the size of their weapons, but by their ability to adapt and endure. Kian's teachings had a profound effect on Kane. His belief in human potential shaped the way she viewed the world. She knew now that the greatest strength of humanity lay in their creativity and resilience. Kane understood that she could continue to develop and refine these strategies for the future of her kingdom. Kane had made a vow she would lead Kalios not with technology alone, but with the strength of her people's spirit. The kingdom would be built on a foundation of perseverance, creativity, and adaptability. She believed that this approach would make Kalios stronger than ever, not because of advanced machinery, but because of the strength that came from within. Kane knew that with the lessons of the war, Kalios could become a powerful empire, one that would never again be underestimated. Kane's commitment to leading her people through the spirit of humanity rather than the power of technology would define the future of her kingdom. It was a path of hope, of unity, and of unbreakable will, traits that no enemy, no matter how advanced, could ever overcome. Kane stood quietly as she reflected on everything she had learned from the war. The battle for Kalios had taught her a critical lesson in war. It's not just about advanced technology or powerful weapons, it's about the tactics and the spirit of the people. The Zyphar had superior technology, but they failed to account for the human ability to adapt, to fight with ingenuity, and to persevere. Kane realized that the key to victory was not just in what you had, but in how you used it, in the determination to never give up. Through the battles, Kane saw that human spirit and strategy could overcome even the most advanced technology. It was the creativity, the flexibility in thinking, and the strength to keep pushing forward that mattered most. This was a pivotal shift in her understanding of strength. Kian, who had become her mentor throughout the war, had taught her these lessons. His guidance had helped Kane understand the power of human tactics. Kian's lessons on thinking outside the box, using the environment, and relying on perseverance were invaluable. His wisdom had shaped Kane into the leader she was becoming. As Kane grew in her understanding, she knew she would continue to develop and adapt these tactics for the future of Kalios. Kane was committed to leading Kalios not just with technology, but with the spirit and ingenuity of its people. She understood now that the true power of her kingdom lay in the will of its people, and she was determined to build a future where that spirit was the foundation of their strength. This commitment would shape the future of Kalios, making it not just a kingdom, but a resilient empire built on human willpower and clever tactics. Kane and Kian stood on the battlefield, gazing out at the impending storm. The Zephyr were not giving up. After their retreat, the Zephyr had regrouped, and now they were preparing for their final assault on Kalios. The Zyphar fleet loomed on the horizon, a massive wave of destruction ready to crash down on the kingdom. This attack was different, far more coordinated, far more ruthless. It would be the Cypher's last attempt to reclaim control. The attack was set to overwhelm everything Kane and Kian had built. The Zephyr were sending in their most powerful forces, equipped with weapons that could obliterate anything in their path. Unlike previous battles, the humans were now facing an enemy that had learned from their past mistakes. This final assault was a test of everything Kane and Kian had fought for. Would their human ingenuity be enough to stop this massive onslaught? Kane felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, but her resolve remained strong. "We've faced worse, Kian," she said, her voice steady despite the pressure. "We've survived this long because we adapt. We'll do it again." Kian, ever the strategist, didn't doubt her words. "We will," he replied. "But this time we'll have to outthink them like never before." As the Zyphar began their relentless assault, Kian immediately began implementing the final tactic he had perfected, with Kane using the Zyphar's own strength against them. He had learned from the previous battles that the Zyphar were predictable in their use of overwhelming force. They expected brute strength and advanced technology to win. But now Kian used the environment to create diversions, leading the Xipher forces into traps where their high-tech weapons were rendered useless. He had also incorporated the best of Kane's strategic insight, using small, nimble groups of fighters to outmaneuver the Xipher and strike at their weak points. Kian's plan involved using misdirection to spread the Xipher forces, then exploiting their overconfidence. His tactics confused and frustrated the Xipher commanders, who had always relied on their superior firepower to dominate. The Xipher didn't expect this. They couldn't predict the unpredictability of the humans' tactics. For once, the Xipher were the ones reacting, instead of dictating the terms of the battle. In the heat of the final confrontation, Kane and Kian emerged victorious once again. The Xipher's overwhelming power had been countered by the adaptability, intelligence, and resilience of the human spirit. As the Xipher forces began to retreat for good, Kane and Kian stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, catching their breath. The sound of the Xipher's retreating ships echoed in the distance. This is it, Kane said, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph in her voice. We've won, Kian gave her a grim smile. We've won because we never stopped adapting. We've learned, we've fought, and we've outsmarted them. Kane nodded. We didn't need their weapons. We needed our will to survive, our ability to think, and our strength to never give up. That's what made us strong. This victory wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was proof that humanity's true strength lay in its capacity to learn and adapt. The humans had shown the galaxy that no matter the technology or the power of their enemies, their ability to think, to fight, and to overcome would always prevail. With the Xipher finally retreating and the war over the kingdom of Kalios had not just survived, it had emerged stronger than ever. Kane and Kian's tactics and resilience had turned the tide. This victory marked a new era for Kalios, one built not on reliance on advanced technology, but on the spirit and ingenuity of its people. This victory, Kane said, looking out over the battlefield, is a new beginning. For Kalios, for humanity. We've proven what we're capable of. And now we rebuild stronger and wiser than before. Kian stood beside her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They had won not through force alone, but through their minds, their hearts, and their unyielding will to protect their world. The war had changed them, and it had changed Kalios. The kingdom would rise from the ashes, guided by the same principles that had led them to victory, the power of human adaptability, resilience, and unity. As Kane gazed out over the revitalized kingdom of Kalios, the scars of war were still fresh, but the spirit of her people had never been stronger. The Cypher had been driven back, and their advanced technology had failed against the one thing they had underestimated: human resilience. Kane realized that the true strength of humanity had never been in the weapons they wielded, but in the will to fight and adapt. The battle had shown her that even without the most advanced technology, humanity could still stand tall and win. We've done it, Kane said quietly to herself, her eyes scanning the horizon. And we did it because we never gave up. The strength isn't in what we have, but in what we are. Kane had learned that moving forward, the kingdom of Kalios would not depend on the technological advances of the Zephyr or any future invader. It would rely on the strength of its people, their minds, their adaptability, and their unwavering spirit. She would lead Kalios with the knowledge that humanity's true power lay in its ability to endure, to think, and to survive against all odds. I will guide Kalios to a future where our greatest strength is not in our weapons, but in the hearts of our people. Kane declared, her voice full of confidence. The kingdom would rebuild not on the strength of machines, but on the strength of unity and resolve. Humanity had proven beyond a doubt that their spirit was unbreakable, and with that, Kalios was poised for a future built on resilience, adaptability, and the power of the human will. Kane stood tall, her heart swelling with pride as Kalios began to rebuild. The war had proven that humanity's greatest strength lay not in technology, but in their unwavering spirit. As long as they stood united, nothing could break them. The future was theirs, and together they would thrive.